So working in a psychiatric ward, crisis unit, being a police officer, working on an ambulance, nurses, all kinds of jobs have lots and lots of direct crisis level kind of work involved in them, like frontline work. Not just psychiatric ward, but all these different kinds of jobs. I would say even teachers to a pretty large extent deal with like crises pretty regularly, school counselors. And for these types of jobs, we have to stay active and we have to stay mobile, right? So does that activate our flight fight state? Absolutely. I worked as a guard slash counselor. We were called counselors, but really was more of a guard in a non-lockdown juvenile hall facility for San Francisco County. It was when the kids couldn't make it in or their offense was too great for the regular population of juvenile hall in San Francisco, they would send them to this place called the Log Cabin Ranch, which was just for higher level offenses. And it wasn't locked down, but it was in the middle of nowhere. So if they tried to escape, there's a good chance they would not make it back to civilization. So I have some direct experience right now. I'm a therapist in a public school district, and crises happen pretty darn often. So yeah, do we have to stay active in those types of jobs? Definitely. But there are jobs where that are high stress. That maybe a lot of jobs are high stress that are not mobile, that don't require a lot of mobility. Like I said, I'm a therapist in a school district. We sit down for most of the day. We don't really have to be super mobile. But depending on what classroom you're in and what age you work with, you might be more mobile than not. I do a lot of one-on-one sit-down therapy. So a lot of stress, a lot of flight fight activation, I mean, but not a lot of mobility. There have definitely been days where I feel like I've just kind of got my butt kicked. Like it's emotionally draining. Not like it could be draining, but also could just be activating. And what we want here is not too much defensive activation. We want enough to deal with the situation, but not so much that we're out of our safety state. And if that happens, the safety state's, if we get too far into our defensive state, that means the safety state is inactive. And that is the vagal brake. Real quick, the vagal brake is the influence of our social engagement system on our heart. The social engagement system, the ventral vagal pathways, if they're active, that keeps our heartbeat at a calmer pace, which keeps our defensive behaviors and feelings, sensations, all these things more at bay. Thoughts, those kind of things get calmed down as long as our vagal brake is active, meaning as long as our safety state, our social engagement system is on. So being mobilized or being in a sympathetic state is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's not necessarily a destructive thing. Having access to those pathways is not even necessarily a defensive thing. It just means they're activated, but as long as the safety state's active, as long as the vagal brake is active, then when we access those more defensive energies, the flight, fight, shutdown, those get repurposed for more like pro-social uses. Or we can use a high amount of flight, fight energy, but for a specific purpose that might require more, it requires more mobilization. So if you have a job where you have to physically restrain a population that is potentially violent toward another, you're going to need some mobilization or a lot of mobilization activated. But ideally, we have that activation along with our safety pathways being activated as well. If not, then it's just defensive energy. Then it's just flight, fight. So if you're mobilized without the safety state active, then the body's just in a flight, fight kind of state. And that's where things can go definitely horribly wrong. So if you're working in a psychiatric ward, if you're working as a therapist, if you're working as a police officer, any of these jobs, you have to have that safety state active. And it's not like a light switch. You don't just turn it off and on. It's ideally strong enough to be kind of on at a baseline, just kind of constantly, which another way to put this is that you have a greater window of tolerance. Hopefully your resilience, your safety state is built up enough to where you have more distress tolerance or more resilience. If not, then any of these situations that are potentially big crisis situations, any of these situations are going to trigger somebody into their more mobilized flight fight energy, and that person won't be able to contain it and then repurpose it or use it to deal with these real life situations that come up. So is somebody asking for trouble by going into these jobs? No, not necessarily. I think some of us can do it, and it's not really, it's challenging, but maybe not as much as for other people. I've talked with officers who say, like, look, either you can do this or you can't. And we were presenting, Mercedes and I, she used to be a co-host for this podcast. We were presenting to police officers, and we were kind of, talking with them openly. It was a really cool discussion about how they maintain access to their own safety system and how they don't, take things too far, because it does require a lot of flight fight energy. And they said, look, some of us can handle this and we're born for this, and some of us just don't belong here. And that's kind of how they framed it. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily setting yourself up for failure if you go into these types of jobs. It's just, can you handle it or not? And you have to really be honest with yourself in general, but also maybe that day, that moment before you step into something, can I handle this? Thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. I have a free polyvagal theory ebook. It's called Trauma and the Polyvagal Paradigm. It's a deep dive into the polyvagal theory and how it connects to trauma. It's a free ebook. All you got to do is sign up for my email list on justinlmft.com. So when it